Let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 24. Genesis chapter 24. Now in chapter 23, we saw the death of Sarah. We saw she lived 127 years, and then she died. And that lifelong partnership between her and Abraham was broken, and Abraham was brokenhearted. And he went and he bought a cave to bury her in. And we saw the significance of that grave, of that marker of that life, how that was the first fulfillment of the promise of God that Abraham that Abraham's descendants would receive all the land that the sole of his foot touched. That all he ever owned was that cave to bury his wife in. But how that cave became a place of hope, of renewal, and of reconciliation. Of how when Abraham died, Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury him in that cave. Of how when Isaac died, Jacob and Esau came together to bury him in that cave. And when Jacob died, they came out of Egypt, all 12 of his sons. After having done what they'd done to Joseph, they all gathered together and brought them back to that cave to bury Jacob. It was an anchor point in the land that would promise that they would return. It was a place of transition where one generation would pass the responsibility on to the next. It was a place of reconciliation where broken relationships were mended and where families were regathered. And now we come to chapter 24, and we're going to do 24 through 26 in a flying review. So we're not going to read every verse. We're not even going to read very much. I'm going to tell you the story, and I'll encourage you to go back home and read the passage for yourself. But here we are in chapter 24. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in everything. Abraham said to his servant, the senior one in his household, who was in charge of everything he had, put your hand under my thigh so that I may make you solemnly promise by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth. You must not acquire a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living. You must instead go to my country and to my relatives to find a wife for my son Isaac. The servant asked him, what if the woman is not willing to come back with me to this land? Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Be careful never to take my son back there, Abraham told him. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and the land of my relatives, promised me with a solemn oath, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you so that you may find a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to come back with you, you will be free from this oath of mine, but you must not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and gave a solemn promise he would carry out his wishes. So Abraham is old. Now Isaac, was 37 when Sarah died. So we're not talking about a teenage boy. We're talking about a grown man. He's 40 when he finally gets married. And Abraham says, well, he's 40 years old. We probably ought to find him a wife. So he calls his servant, who we know from the other passages, Eleazar, the man from Damascus. And he tells him, I want you to go back to where my family is and get my son a wife from there. He cannot marry these Canaanites. He must go back and marry my people. And his servant is thinking, they got it pretty good back there in Mesopotamia. It's a pretty good life. What if she doesn't want to come live in the sticks? What if she doesn't want to move out here and live among these people? Should I take him back there so he can get married? And Abraham says, absolutely not. He is not to leave the land. This is the land that God has promised him, and he's to spend his life here. He says, if the woman won't come, then that's okay. You can come back. But he's not to leave the land. And so we know the servant packs up 10 camels, and he has some servants along with him. And he takes some presents, and he goes back to Padan Aram, where Abraham's brother Nahor's family is living. And on the way, he's thinking, now how am I going to pick a wife for Isaac? What criteria do I use? How do I know which one is the right one? And so he talks to God about it. And he says, Here, I got an idea. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to sit down at the well. And if a woman comes out to draw water from the well, which is what the women did, he said, I'll ask her for a drink of water. And if she offers to water my camels too, then I'll know that she's the one. Now, this is a big deal because each camel can drink up to 10 gallons of water, and he's got 10 camels with him. So this young lady is going to be drawing water out of that well, and it's not a shallow well, and they don't have a hand pump. She's got to put a jar down on a rope, fill it up and pull it up and pour it into the trough. And so if anyone is willing to volunteer to do that, then she's the woman for Isaac. And so he prays this prayer, and no sooner has he prayed this prayer than Rebekah comes out with a jar on her shoulder. You've all seen the pictures, headed to the well. And she lowers her jar down, and so Eleazar says to her, excuse me, ma'am, can I have a drink? She pulls the jar up. She says, sure. She lowers her jar down so he can get a drink. And then she says, you just stay there. I'll water your camels too. And she starts pouring the water in the trough as fast as she can pull it up. And Eleazar starts praising the Lord. You knew exactly who I needed to. Now, this sounds like a funny story, but the fact is that there are some characteristics here that a wife for Isaac is going to need. Now, remember, Isaac isn't just some bum living in a tent out in the desert. Isaac is the inheritor of all that Abraham has, and Abraham has a pretty big operation. Abraham isn't just, some wild guy. He's the sheik over a community. He's got 318 standing soldiers. How many servants do you think he has? Flocks and herds. And so Abraham is responsible for all of this, and Isaac is going to be. And so just as Sarah was the princess of this operation, so Rebekah is going to have to be. So they have to have some characteristics to be an appropriate wife for Isaac. He's looking for a woman of responsibility, someone who is willing to go out and serve her family. Rebekah went out and she was carrying back the water. The water just wasn't for her. The water was to provide for her entire family. She is a woman of responsibility who takes responsibility for her household. She's a woman of hospitality. She didn't see this travel-worn old man sitting over here in the corner, and when he tries to speak to her, just ignore him. No, she saw a thirsty man who needed a drink, and she took care of him. She offered him hospitality, and then after this, she says, look, don't sleep out here. You bring your camels back. We got plenty of fodder. We got plenty of hay. We got room for you. You come back to my house and spend the night. And she's a woman of compassion. She saw that the camels were thirsty, and she met the need. Now, those are wonderful characteristics to look for in a wife. And if you're looking for a wife, wells seem to be a good place to find them in the Bible. We know that there are many wives found at wells in the Bible. But here, these are the characteristics that Rebekah displayed. And so Eleazar takes out some presents, and he gives her a nose ring, not the kind they wear nowadays. It goes in the side of the nose, but this thing is 1/4 ounce of gold. It's quite heavy for a nose ring. And then he gives her some bangles for her wrists, and she runs back to her family, and she shows their family this guy. He comes from Abraham, Uncle Abraham, and look what he gave me. And Laban, her brother, sees the gold, and he gets dollar signs in his eyes. He says, there's some connections to be made here. This is the first time we get to meet Laban, and we learn about his character from this story that we're going to need to know later on when Jacob goes and works for him. And so Laban, he comes running out. He wants to see this guy that gives away 1/4 ounce nose rings. And he runs up and he says, well, why haven't you come to the house yet? Come on, pack up your stuff. We got plenty of room for you. And so they, in verse 31, Verse 31, Laban said to him, "Come, you who are blessed by the Lord. Why are you standing out here when I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So Eleazar gets his caravan together and they go back to Nahor's house, and they sit down to a meal, and Laban says, "Eat." And Eleazar says, "I'm not going to eat until I conduct my business." He said, because if he eats their food, they are under host obligation to him. And he's still afraid that when they hear that he wants to take Rebekah away, they're going to kick him out. And if he eats their food, they can't. So he says, "Look, I'm going to be fair to you guys. I'm not going to touch the food until we have this conversation." Laban says, "Well, tell us what you got to say." So in verse 34, "I am the servant of Abraham," he began. "The Lord has richly blessed my master, and he has become very wealthy. The Lord has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah bore a son to him when she was old, and my master has given him everything he owns. My master made me swear an oath. He said, 'You must not acquire a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but you must go to the family of my father and to my relatives to find a wife for my son.' But I said to my master, 'What if the woman does not want to go with me?' He answered, 'The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you. He will make your journey a success, and you will find a wife for my son from among my relatives, from my father's family. You will be free from your oath if you go to my relatives, and they will not give her to you. Then you will be free from your oath. When I came to the spring today, I prayed, O Lord God of my master Abraham, if you have decided to make my journey successful, may events unfold as follows. Here I am standing by the spring. When the young woman goes out to draw water, I'll say, 'Please give me a little water to drink from your jug.' Then she will reply to me, 'Drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too.' May that woman be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son." Before I finished praying in my heart, along came Rebekah with her water jug on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, so I said to her, "Please give me a drink." She quickly lowered her jug from her shoulder and said, "Drink, and I'll give your camels water too." So I drank, and she gave the camels water. Then I asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" She replied, "The daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to Nahor." I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her wrists. Then I bowed down and worshiped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right path to find the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show faithful love to my master, tell me. But if not, tell me as well, so I may go on my way." Then Laban and Bethuel replied, "This is the Lord's doing. Our wishes are of no concern. Rebekah stands here before you. Take her and go, so she may become the wife of your master's son, just as the Lord has decided." When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then he brought out gold, silver, jewelry, and clothing, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave valuable gifts to her brother and to her mother. Now that's interesting. He gives the valuable gifts to her mother and her brother, not her father. You can tell Laban has sort of taken over the household here. After this, he and the men who were with him ate a meal and stayed there overnight. When they got up in the morning, he said, "Let me leave now, so I can return to my master." But Rebekah's brother and her mother replied, "Let the girl stay with us a few more days, perhaps 10. Then she can go." So this isn't all about, well, we're never going to see her again. We'll miss her. Let us have some more time with her. They're trying to get more money out of Eleazar. Verse 56. But he said to them, "Don't detain me. The Lord has granted me success in my journey. Let me leave now so I may return to my master." They said, "We'll call the girl and find out what she wants to do." So they said, "Well, we'll ask Rebekah and see if she wants to go." They're thinking Rebekah's going to side with them and say, "No, we'll hang out for a little bit, and maybe you can come up with some more money to hurry things along." But verse 58, so they called Rebekah and asked her, "Do you want to go with this man?" She replied, "I want to go." So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, accompanied by her female attendant with Abraham's servant and his men. They blessed Rebekah with these words, "Our sister, may you become the mother of thousands of 10,000s. May your descendants possess the strongholds of their enemies." Then Rebekah and her female servant mounted camels and rode away with the men. So Abraham's servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac came from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negeb. Then he went out to relax in the field early in the evening. Then he looked up and saw there were camels approaching. Rebekah looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked Abraham's servant, "Who is this man that's walking in the field towards us?" "That's my master," the servant replied. So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac everything that happened. Then Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent. He took her as his wife and loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So that's the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac's 40 years old. We don't know how old Rebekah is, probably a bit younger. And they fall in love at first sight. Do you get the feeling that Isaac had no idea that a wife was coming for him? That he's just out in the field walking around, and Eliezer shows up and says, "Well, Isaac, here's your wife." But they fall in love at first sight. He takes her and moves her into Sarah's tent. In other words, he places her in Sarah's place. The idea is that Abraham has gone into retirement and Isaac is in charge of everything. Now we're going to you'll read about the death of Abraham, but the fact is Abraham doesn't actually die until Jacob and Esau are about 15 years old. Abraham has just sort of gone into retirement. He has a second marriage with Keturah. They have a bunch of children who also become nations that move east and aren't part of the promise. But this becomes the story of Isaac. Now, the interesting thing is that Isaac, it really seems to be kind of passive. He's just sort of a caretaker. He takes care of what his father had. We're not going to go into his life because we're moving on. But he sort of runs from conflict. He avoids conflict. He sort of just keeps to himself. And we're going to go to chapter 25. Verse 19. This is the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless, and the Lord answered his prayer. His wife Rebekah became pregnant, but the children struggled inside her. And she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she asked the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from within you. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So she's barren. She doesn't have any children for 20-some years. And then Isaac prays for her, and God blesses her, and she becomes pregnant. She's expecting. But, they don't have tests. They don't have sonograms. They don't have any of that stuff. And she has no idea that she's got twins in her womb, and she starts to get really big. And these kids are really active. And, she's been around pregnant women before. She knows things aren't normal. She says, "What's going on with me?" And so God answers her and says, you got two nations in your womb. Now that's pretty crowded, isn't it? But when we look at when we look at Jacob and Esau, we understand that both of them became fathers of nations. Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and Esau becomes Edom. And we recognize those names, don't we? Edom moves to Mount Seir. God gives Edom Mount Seir, and they become a nation. They are established long before Israel becomes a nation. Jacob goes down into Egypt and spends 230 years in Egypt, and his descendants become a strong nation down there, and then they leave and come back. So that's what God is prophesying, that there are two nations that will descend from her, and one will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. It's interesting to see that God generally uses the younger son. Ishmael was older, but Isaac was the chosen one. Esau is older, but Jacob has the birthright. David was the youngest of 8, and he became the king of Israel. It's interesting that God tends to overlook the ones that we would have chosen. We look at the firstborn as the heir. As a matter of fact, that's what the birthright means, we're going to get to in a few minutes. the older is supposed to inherit. The older is supposed to have the responsibility. The older is supposed to have the blessing. But God tends to skip over what we would choose and choose the one who is right for the job, the one that he has his hand on. So Jacob and Esau are born, and they're wrestling even as they're born. And Esau is born, and he is reddish all over, and he's a hairy baby. That must have been quite a surprise. And so they called him Esau, or Red. Then his brother came out with his hand clutching Esau's heel, and they named him Jacob. Jacob means heel grabber. And that's a saying or a nickname for someone who trips other people up, a trickster. But they named him that because he literally was holding on to Esau's heel as they were born. And Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skilled hunter, a man of the open fields. But Jacob was an even-tempered man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for fresh game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, sometimes we get the idea that Esau was, a man's man. He was very masculine, and Jacob was more feminine, and he liked to hang out in the tents with his mom. Well, that's not the idea here. We know that Jacob is a skilled wrestler. He wrestles with God, and God has to cripple his thigh to overcome him. So we know that this doesn't mean that one's masculine and one's more feminine. What it's talking about is Esau is somebody who likes to do what he wants to do. He's out hunting all the time. He doesn't really care about the family business. Whereas Jacob, he stays in the tents. He's an administrator. He's handling business for his dad. He's keeping the accounts. He's making sure all the logistics are taken care of. He's really got a handle on this. And so Jacob is making sure everybody's taken care of. Esau's out taking care of himself. He just does what he wants to do. He's the rich boy. He's his dad's the boss. Nobody's going to say anything to him. So if he wants to skip work and go hunting, that's what he does. And his dad loves it because he likes the fresh game. Now, verse 29. Now Jacob cooked some stew, and when Esau came in from the open fields, he was famished. So Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me some of the red stuff." Yes, some of this red stuff, because I'm starving. That's why it's also called Edom. Edom means red. So this becomes his nickname. Hey, Red. So Jacob is fixing lentils, and it's not that he's in there cooking for his family. He's preparing it for the workers for when they come back. Esau hadn't done a lick of work. He's been out hunting, and he hadn't caught anything, so he's hungry. And he comes back, and he says, let me have some of the workers' food. I'm starving to death. But Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." Now, we tend to confuse the birthright and the blessing. The birthright was the right of the firstborn son to receive a double share of the inheritance. So here, if there are two boys, they would divide the inheritance into three, and the oldest would get 2 shares and the youngest would get 1 share. But not only is it the share of the inheritance, but it's also the position of the father. So Esau, with his birthright, was going to become responsible for this huge family business, which was really going to cramp his style. When Isaac retires and Esau has to take over running all of these flocks, all of these herds, managing all of these servants, handling all of this financial stuff, he's not going to be able to do what he wants to do, and he doesn't want that. Jacob, on the other hand, has worked really hard and has been keeping everything running smoothly, and he sees this oaf is going to inherit everything. He's going to ruin it all my hard work. So he sees an opportunity here. And Esau comes in. He says, "I'm starving. Give me some food." Jacob says, "Okay, give me your birthright." Esau says, "I'm going to die if I don't eat. So sure, you can have the birthright." And Jacob says, "Okay, swear an oath to me right now." And Esau swears the oath. Jacob hands him the the food, and they both got what they want. And Esau's not mad about it. Esau's happy to be rid of this birthright. Esau's happy to let Jacob run the business, have the responsibility, have all that weight on his shoulders, and Esau's just going to hunt for the rest of his life. He's not upset about that. And so then we're going to skip over to chapter 27. Now Ishmael, remember Isaac's older brother, Ishmael died at the age of 137. And so now in chapter 27, Isaac has reached the age of 137. And he seems to have decided, okay, this is it for me. Ishmael kicked off at 137. I am too. And he has probably has cataracts. He can't see. And so verse 1 of chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he was almost blind, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," Esau replied. Isaac said, "Since I am so old, I could die at any time. Therefore take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the open fields and hunt down some wild game for me. Then prepare for me some tasty food, the kind I love, and bring it to me, and I will eat it so that I may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah had been listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau went out in the open fields to hunt down some wild game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father tell your brother Esau, bring me some wild game and prepare for me some tasty food. Then I will eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now then, my son, do exactly what I tell you. Go to the flock and get me 2 of the best young goats. I'll prepare them in a tasty way for your father, just the way he loves them. Then you will take it into your father. Thus he will eat and bless you before he dies." "But Esau, my brother, is a hairy man," Jacob protested to his mother Rebekah, "and I have smooth skin. My father may touch me. Then he'll think I'm mocking him, and I'll bring a curse on myself instead of a blessing." So his mother said to him, "Any curse you bring will fall on me, my son. Just obey me. Go and get them for me." So he went out and got the goats and brought them to his mother. She prepared some tasty food, just the way his father loved it. Then Rebekah took her older son's, Esau's best clothes, which she had with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She put the skins of the young goats on his hands and the smooth part of his neck. Then she handed the tasty food and bread to him she had made for her son Jacob. So Esau goes out hunting. He's going to get some venison for his father. His father's going to give him the blessing. Now the blessing is not the birthright. Everybody knows Jacob has the birthright. He's inheriting the business. The blessing is God's favor on his life. So for Esau, that would look like good hunting. That would look like lots of prosperity, easy life, not a lot of responsibility. And that's what Esau wants. So he goes out hunting, but Rebekah hears this. She says, "Esau, he's just going to waste it. We got to get Jacob the blessing too." So she goes to him and says, "Hey, bring me some goats. I'll fix something. He won't be able to tell the difference. And you'll get the blessing." Jacob said, "Have you looked at me?" He's going to feel my hands and he's going to know I'm not Esau. She said, "I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." So he goes and gets the goat. She takes the skin of the goat. She puts it on makes him some gloves and puts it on the back of his neck. She puts Esau's coat on because it smells like him. And she gives him the food and she says, "Go on in there." Verse 18, when he went to his father and said, "My father," Isaac replied, "Here I am. Which are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat some of my wild game so that you can bless me." But Isaac asked his son, "How in the world did you find it so quickly, my son?" "Because the Lord your God brought it to me," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come closer so I can touch you, my son, and know for certain if you are really my son Esau." So Jacob went over to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So Isaac blessed Jacob. Then he asked, "Are you really my son Esau?" "I am," Jacob replied. Isaac said, "Bring some of the wild game for me to eat, my son. Then I will bless you." So Jacob brought it to him, and he ate it. He also brought him wine. Isaac drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here and kiss me, my son." So Jacob went over and kissed him. Then Isaac caught the scent of his clothing. he blessed him, saying, "Yes, my son smells like the scent of an open field which the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of the sky and the richness of the earth, plenty of grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. You will be Lord over your brothers, and sons of your mother will bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed." And so we go through this blessing, and we see he asks the Lord to give him plenty of water and plenty of food, plenty of respect, and plenty of power, and may he have the protection of God. Isaac had just finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence when his brother Esau returned from the hunt. He also prepared some tasty food and brought it into his father. Esau said to him, "My father, get up and eat some of your son's wild game, then you can bless me." His father Isaac asked, "Who are you?" "I am your firstborn son," he replied, "Esau." Isaac began to shake violently, and he asked, "Then who else hunted game and brought it to me? I ate of all of it just before you arrived, and I blessed him. He indeed will be blessed." Esau heard his father's words, and he wailed loudly and bitterly. He said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But Isaac replied, "Your brother came here deceitfully and took away your blessing." Esau exclaimed, "Jacob is the right name for him. He has tripped me up 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." Then he asked, "Have you not kept back a blessing for me?" Now this is interesting. He didn't care about the birthright. He wanted the blessing. But now that he can't have the blessing, he's mad about the birthright. So Esau wants the blessing. He didn't want the birthright, but he wants the blessing. He wants the blessing without the responsibility. And you know what? We do that all the time, don't we? We want God to bless us, but we don't want to be responsible to him. We want God to bless what we want to do, but we don't want to give our lives over to him, to his purpose, and allow him to use us for what he wants to do. We want him to approve our plans, but we don't want to put our lives in his hands and say, "Whatever you want, it's yours." Jacob was willing to take the birthright, and he received the blessing. Esau wanted the blessing, but he didn't want the birthright. And we need to understand that you cannot have the blessing without the responsibility. You have to be willing to shoulder the burden in order to receive the reward. And our society today tells us in so many different ways, you can enjoy the pleasure without the consequences. You can enjoy the rewards without doing the work. But the fact is, life doesn't work that way. God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, that you will also reap. And we need to understand that that in order to enjoy the blessing, we must shoulder the birthright. Verse 37, Isaac replied to Esau, "Look, I have made him lord over you. I have made all his relatives his servants and provided him with grain and new wine. What is left that I can do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you only have that one blessing, my father? Bless me too." Then Esau wept loudly. So his father Isaac said to him, "See here, your home will be by the richness of the earth and by the dew of the sky above. You will live by the sword, but you will serve your brother. When you grow restless, you will tear off his yoke from your neck." So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing his father had given to his brother. Esau said privately, "The time of mourning for my father is near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Now, actually, Isaac lives for decades more, but he malingers for about 60 years. He's one of those, every time you talk to them, they're dying, but they just never actually get around to doing it. That's how Isaac was. He laid in his deathbed for about 60 years. But the blessing that he gives to Esau is very interesting. He gives him a home that will be the richness of the earth. And we know that God is given to Esau Mount Seir. We read that in the book of Numbers. So he got that blessing. He's to serve his brother, but he can break the yoke when he grows restless. And we understand that's what Esau did. He stayed in Isaac's community for a long time, but then by the time Jacob comes back, he's moved off to Mount Seir and he started his own kingdom, and the kingdom of Edom. So we understand that God did allow Esau to have a blessing, but it wasn't the blessing he could have had he been willing to bear the responsibility. Let's not shirk the responsibilities that God gives us. Let's not avoid the work to receive the reward. We need to be willing to shoulder the burden, bear the cost, and enjoy the blessing. Father, we are so thankful that you are a just God. And Lord, that we understand that this world that you have created has rules. Father, I pray that you will teach us to live within the rules. And Father, may we enjoy the blessing of bearing your birthright. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.